Hello, hello. It's Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today, we're going to be taking a close look at an album from Soundgarden, Superunknown, and particularly probably the biggest track off of this album, Black Hole Sun. And if we can, I also want to look at some of the other tracks from this album, if we have time. I've got Fell on Black Days loaded up here, which I think is another one of the great mixes on this album. And in some of the other recent mix breakdowns we've done, we've looked at some big pop hits. We looked at Pharrell Williams' Happy. We looked at the best Britney Spears track ever done, Toxic. And today we're looking at rock tracks. And one of the big differences here is going to be that a huge, huge part of what made those pop tracks really work, we had to talk so much about arrangement. And although arrangement is also important here in any of these rock mixes, we get to focus, I think, a little bit more on the mixing and production side of things. Because the arrangement that's here doesn't demand a certain approach to mixing. These records could have been mixed in different ways than they were, but the choices here are awesome. These are, in my opinion, some of the best sounding rock mixes put out on this album, Superunknown. I was more of a Nirvana fan growing up. In case I got cold, I got my flannel shirt back here. But I had ripped jeans with holes the size of my head in them when I was a teenager. And I had, super long hair and all that. And totally sold on the whole grunge thing. But I was more of a Nirvana guy than a Soundgarden guy growing up. But later in life, this is, 30 years after this record has come out, people still bring up the stuff off of Soundgarden records as sonic references for me to master records to, in a way they don't with, say, Nirvana's Nevermind. Nevermind, don't get me wrong, is a great sounding record. It's great songs on it. And the sound of the record is really easily palatable. Like, it doesn't get in the way of the songs. But I think the mixes here on Superunknown in certain ways are bigger, more massive, take more risks. They might not always have the same great degree of translation between a super small system and a big system. And if you ever get the chance to listen to Superunknown on a really great sounding system, it is a really great sounding record. Without me yakking too much, let me start pulling up the Pro Tools screen here, and we can start looking and listening to some of this stuff together. I've got these stereo 2 tracks pulled up here because really what I want to get into is not this whole thing where sometimes people go in stems and listen to things in isolation. I want us to hear this as a cohesive mix so we can think through and listen through exactly what makes this song work. And if we have time, I've got not only Black Hole Sun here, but Fell on Black Days, which I think is a really awesome mix, and maybe a little bit more of a conventional mix than Black Hole Sun. There's so much to dig into and talk about and hear on this one. If you're here for the live stream premiere of this, say hello in the chat box. Let me know if you can see me and hear me okay, and let me know if the audio levels are good for you once we start playing back these tracks. If you are here afterwards, consider giving us a rating and review if you're on the audio-only platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Rating and reviews really do help spread this out there. Hit like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And if you want to sponsor this podcast, the best way to sponsor it is by sponsoring yourself. Check out some of our great full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, Compression Breakthroughs, EQ Breakthroughs. They're guaranteed to change the way you work forever or your money back. Also, that's it for now. Let's just dive in and start listening. All right. So Black Hole Sun, one of the few things I want you to focus on here when we're listening to this first pass, we're going to go through just a bit of it, is the relative relationship between things like snare drum, kick drum, vocals, and guitar. These are some of our main elements here. And I want you to think to yourself, as you're listening down, which of these instruments in each section is our priority A instrument? Which of those instruments are more B-tier instruments, and which are our everything else? And I also want you to pay close attention to the panning that's going on here, particularly with things like guitars. Check it out. Here's the opening of Black Hole Sun. Let's try that one more time.
In my eyes, indisposed, in disguises no one knows, hides the face, lies the snake, in the sun, in my
All right, let's stop there for a second. Let me know what you think are the A-tier instruments in each of these sections. Let me know what you're noticing around panning. One of the great things that happens throughout this record is the judicious use of panning here makes things sound super wide while having a really super solid center. And there's a lot of hard panning on this record, especially when it comes to guitars. Things are really far out there. We're not just panning things, 20%. Check out in the very intro of Black Hole Sun, we start out with a really hard pan guitar on the right. And then there's this other hard pan guitar. There's a really watery sound, totally different tone that's panned out to the left. However, what's happening is that, to me, it seems like the effect on that left pan guitar brings that guitar back to the center. So it seems like a lot of that left guitar itself is pretty hard to the left, but some of the effect pulls back to the center. And we'll hear this kind of thing happening on a bunch of guitars throughout the record. If we have time to listen to Fell on Black Days, we'll hear a little bit of that kind of thing happening in there as well. So check this out one more time, just panning choices in the beginning. Also, a huge contrast between dry and wet. One of the things that helps this second guitar that comes in on the left-hand side feel so kind of syrupy and swirly and wet is just how dry and up front that right pan guitar is. The right pan guitar being all the way out 100% really pulls it forward in the sound stage. And this is an interesting thing you have to notice about panning, and that is super important when it comes to rock panning in particular, is whenever you're taking things and you're panning them hard out, they tend to come forward to the listener. This is just how our ears work, right? When we're closer up to objects, we're localizing them more specifically around us in left to right. And as things get further and further away from us, they tend to converge more and more in a single point. So generally speaking, you take the same sound, you have the same relative perceived loudness, and if you have it hard pan, it's going to sound closer, and if you have it center pan, it's going to get a little bit further away. So that's one of the things that's happening here. Hard pan, super dry guitar, and that contrast of a super dry, super upfront, super close guitar is making the second guitar that comes in even more swirly still. But they're not just leaving us with this big hole in the center where we have something hard pan on the right that's dry, something hard pan that's on the left that's wet. That left guitar is being brought back into the center, I think, by having effects returns that are more centered on that left guitar. So they're brought back a little bit more into the same world. So you don't have something that's super unbalanced, that's just pulling us out to the edges without a solid center. Let's listen to that again from the second half of this intro going into the verse, and then I'll tell you what I'm noticing when we hit the verse.
In my eyes, indisposed, in disguises no one knows, hides the face, lies the snake, in the sun, in my disgrace, boiling heat, summer stench, neath the black, the sky looks dead, call my name through
Now, before we get into this chorus, and there's going to be such a big payoff in this chorus, what are you noticing as far as the volume relationships in the verse? This is something where I would say Chris Cornell's vocal is pretty far up there, and the two dominant instruments for me, level-wise, in this section of this track are going to be, for me, vocal and snare drum. That's what really stands out here. And then supporting that, the guitar is an important instrument, but because of how syrupy it is, because of how muted on top it is, it kind of is a little bit more in the background. It's a little bit more of a B-tier instrument relative to vocal and snare, which are so just front and center. And then the kick and the bass and the hi-hat, I mean, they all have a role to play in here, but I would also put these elements kind of more in B-tier. But one of the interesting things about this verse is there's almost nothing in here that's C tier. Somehow they get all these other elements to like compete for B space. And the reason they can do that, at least in this verse section, is because of how sparse it is, how much room there is between notes. You rarely have elements walking over one another. I mean, when the hi-hat comes in, it doesn't need to be crazy loud to be front and center because there's really nothing occupying the same rhythmic space as the hi-hat. The same thing happens with our tom hits. We don't have a whole bunch of other stuff that's walking over our tom hits, so they get to be a little bit hotter in the mix than they might be in a more dense section later on. But let me know what you're hearing. For me, vocals are up there and snare is up there. And this is one of the things that for me is going to shift when we hit the chorus. And how you manage the relationship between these three elements, in particular, vocal, snare drum, and guitars, getting that right is like 80% of getting a rock mix right. Let's hear the back half of this verse going to the chorus, and let me know what you hear changes around the relationship between vocal, snare drum, and guitars. Here we go.
Summer stench, neath the black, the sky looks dead. Call my name through
Such a loud snare.
the cream, and I'll hear you scream again. Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come?
Man, the chorus is mixed brilliantly, and this is not the best chorus in the track. They get bigger and badder as they go along. It's interesting that here in the chorus, there's still this thing where it's like vocals and snare are super hot, and they're hotter than on some of the other tracks in the record. This is the single, and there's reasons there's a single, and there's reasons that this approach is taken on it. But for me, the guitars kind of leap forward as far as their level in the mix, particularly if you're listening on headphones or a decent system. We're now doubling up on the guitars, and we have kind of hard pan balanced guitars on the left and right. And they kind of just up their level of importance in the mix. But some of the things that give this track so much character are the sound of the snare drum. There's such a signature snare sound on this particular track, unique from the other tracks in the album. All the the whole album has great snare sounds, but they're all great in slightly different ways. And this one is slightly trashy. It sounds like a really deep metal drum. I think this is probably stainless steel or brass drum. There's been some debate about exactly which drums were used on different tracks on the song, and a lot of this comes down to the mix working because the recording works really well and the band is really tight. But there are important decisions that the mixer, Brendan O'Brien, is making here, and you can hear more and more of them as we go along into the chorus of this song. And then we gotta save some time for Fell on Black Days, because the way the guitars on that one drop, there's differences between the way that's mixed and this is mixed. They're totally worth checking out. But let's go into our second verse and hear our second verse going into our second chorus, and just try to notice the differences between chorus 1 and chorus 2. What we're going to start to hear a lot more of is how the background vocals are treated in this song, and they're treated in very rock-specific ways that are very different from pop idiom background vocals. When we listen to Pharrell Williams' Happy, when we listen to Britney Spears' Toxic, background vocal approach is totally, totally different on this track relative to those. And to me, it sets a bar for what background vocals are supposed to sound like, quote unquote, on great rock records. All right, here we are on the back half of the second verse going into second chorus.
In my shoes, walking sleep. In my youth, I pray to keep heaven send hell away. No one sings like you anymore.
I'm sorry, I have to stop there because we have to notice what's going on with the vocal in this. This is perfect vocal level mixing. One of the things you'll notice if you really pay attention is that the vocal gets smaller and bigger at different points in this chorus, but it's always kind of at the same consistent level. There are times where he's practically speaking in this verse, and there's times where he's practically yelling in this verse. Chris Cornell is a really dynamic singer. That's part of what makes him interesting and compelling as a singer. Super dynamic. But the mixer is probably riding the vocal here, in addition to there being significant compression on the vocal. And this has the effect of bringing up these quiet spoken parts to where they're like large and have mass. And then sometimes when he's singing louder, it makes the vocal feel like it's quieter in the mix and that he's barely able to yell over the band, even though they're practically at the same level. The quiet parts and the loud parts of the vocal, we get this impression of the band almost starts to sound like it's bigger when he starts singing louder. Because all of a sudden we have this impression of, we can tell by the tone of this guy's voice, he's singing loud, but he's barely peeking out over the band. And it has this effect of, in those moments, making it feel like the vocal takes a little bit of a back seat and the whole band has come forward, even though the relative levels haven't changed that much. Listen for that and see if you can hear what I'm talking about. And just imagine the size of Chris Cornell's face, or him as a character in this song, and how the size of him changes relative to the band when he's yelling versus when he's not quite yelling yet, but when he's belting compared to when he is singing a little bit more quiet.
In my shoes, walking sleep. In my youth, I pray to keep heaven send hell away. No one sings like you anymore. Black hole sun, won't you come and wash away the rain? Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Black hole sun, won't you come and wash away the rain? Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come?
Man, it's hard to stop this song. And this is one of the things that makes it successful, right? As a song. I wanted to stop for a little while to tell you about things that I heard earlier, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. One of the interesting things here is that, unlike some, more modern computer programmed pop productions, is that the mix relationships here kind of breathe and ebb and flow a little bit. We don't necessarily have one instrument coming in and hitting one tier and staying in that tier the entire time. There's allowed to be this little bit of an ebb and flow. And a couple things we have to talk about are vocal treatment, super important. But I do love how, Brendan, in mixing this, allows, when the guitars first come in, he allows them to come in big. Like, this is something that you have to allow to happen in rock choruses, is guitars in particular, when the chorus hits, if you have to have a pushing fight between guitars and drums, guitars should probably win a tiny bit in most rock tracks and most rock records. And they're allowed to win just a tiny bit over that snare drum that was so loud in the verse. They're allowed to kind of just leapfrog just a tiny, tiny bit above it. But as the chorus goes on, we get to focus on different things. But before I talk about the vocal treatment in the chorus, I just want to take a quick look at what's happening to the vocals in the verse and then what changes for the chorus. So one of the things you might finally start to notice here as you're paying attention to the vocal is that there's a little bit of a repeating delay on Chris Cornell's voice. You can particularly really hear it at the end of this verse. After his last words, you can really get a sense for exactly what's happening with that delay. And you'll notice, like a good mixer should, he has that delay darker than the main vocal. And we're not hearing it so much as a distinct repeat. And we're using this delay to fill the role kind of that a reverb would do. If you can hear it, there is a distinct repeat there, but throughout the verse it's mostly buried. But right at the tail end of this verse, you can hear it emerge, so you can get a sense for what kind of delay he's really using throughout this verse. Have a listen to that, and then listen to how the vocal texture changes when we hit the chorus. What's different? Can you identify it?
No one sings like you anymore. Black hole sun, won't you come and wash away the rain? Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come?
So when we hit the chorus, it's a really simple modulation sounding effect, basically through doubling. We're going from a single vocal with a little bit of delay to the vocal texture changes because of a double that is not perfect. And there's other doubles that will come in this chorus and little reinforcing bits that'll be more pronounced than this, but a big textural change comes from either reducing the amount of delay in the vocal or just being swallowed up by all these other elements, and then this double coming in the vocal. It gives us a little bit of a modulation effect. But you'll notice what he's not doing with the vocal doubles. We're not panning that out too. Still, the only things that are really super wide panned are these guitars. Is there panning in the drum kit? Yes, there's panning in the drum kit. But here's a big thing for rock mixing, especially around choruses. Are the drums panned as wide as the guitars? To my ears, I'm going to say no. The drums are not panned as wide as the guitars in the chorus. And there's a good reason for that. Really, you can only have so many elements kind of pull you out wide. And if you try to make everything pull out wide, if we had super duper hard pan percussion elements, super duper hard pan guitars, and super duper hard pan vocal doubles, all of a sudden the mix will not sound as wide as it does now. What Brendan's able to create here in his mix is this difference between a really super solid center, kick, snare, bass, and vocal, now that has a double added, and super wide guitars. And that contrast between super solid center, super wide guitars is what makes it sound impressive, what makes it sound immersive. And yeah, there's some width, and you can kind of localize where different drum hits are happening. Like, you know, cymbals and toms aren't 100% straight down the middle, but we're not putting our tom fills out 100% like we are with our guitar fills. And we really can't have everything competing for the edge real estate there. So notice that about the panning. And in addition to the relationships, the panning, now we got to look at the vocal treatments. And the vocals are so cool and so simple the way that they're mixed in the chorus. There's just little bits of extra things that pop in, and they're often treated differently. This is not just mixing, it's also production. But one of the first standout doubles where the double starts to overtake the vocal a little bit, and we have like a background vocal that's starting just for a moment to really separate from the lead vocal, is on this word come. I think it's the first come in this chorus. Black hole sun, won't you come? I can't remember if it's the first come or the second come. Listen to that, and then after that, that is like the opening the doorway to the vocal arrangement starting to get slightly more complex. Let's hear what's happening.
Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you come?
And of course, the little bridge sections we get in here and the little musical interludes in here are part of what makes this song work so incredibly well. But I was totally wrong. It's not the first come or the second come. It's the third come. So it's really on the second half of this chorus where we're starting to now not have our double be treated as a, you know, close to exact but not exact double that's just thickening out the voice and giving a different texture from the verses. Now all of a sudden our doubles are starting to separate from the lead voice, and we almost have two competing characters played by the same actor going on. So listen to this third time. I think he's saying, won't you come? There's that come that really leaps out. Like that background vocal is mixed slightly louder than it should be. It almost overtakes the lead, and it's super dry. And then the support of that background vocal leaves. And for the next, about a phrase almost, there's no support. And then we have this new additional character come in and support the following phrase. And then after that, and really the last bit of this chorus, that's where we get the repeating, won't you come, black hole sun, won't you come, where we're repeating left and right, alternating between left and right. And it's almost such a hokey, easy trick to do, right? Background vocal left, background vocal right. But it works so well. It's so compelling. And the sound staging he gets on that vocal is awesome. That answer line that's repeating in the sides, far left and far right. The sound staging is awesome, and that's so far back in the mix, yet so audible at the same time. It's loud enough to be super clear, where it's almost like, is it bordering on being like a B tier element? But it's super clear because there's so much space for it. And even though the levels are low in the mix, our ear is drawn to it because it's hard panned. And our ear is drawn to it because it changes sides, left and right. So this is a cool thing where you can take a C tier element in level and make it feel like a B tier element in importance just by playing around with panning and doing things that make it so it would almost be distracting. If this answer part that he sings was just pan center and just stayed there and it was at the same level, we wouldn't notice it to nearly the same degree. And what this allows him to do is he can tuck that way down, have it feel really distant, but have it feel really obvious and apparent. So listen one more time to this vocal arranging in here and see if you can pick up on some of those ideas.
Wash away the rain, black hole sun, won't you come, won't you come?
So, in this musical interlude, what is the focus? And this is something really important because they're mixing this to be like, this is going to be Soundgarden's pop hit, right? It's their most heard song. And it's the song they want to resonate with the largest possible audience. We get to this instrumental bridge section. And what's the focus? There's a guitar solo going on here. But is the guitar solo the A-tier instrument in this section? Absolutely not. What is A-tier in this section? One of the main things that's A-tier here in this chorus is this descending guitar riff, repetitive guitar riff that happens, I lost count, 4, 5, 6 times. This descending guitar riff, bow, 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 bow. That's my imitation, having not warmed up, of the electric guitar line in this chorus section. But on top of that, it's probably Kim Thiel. Is that how you say his name? Thiel? Kim, if you're watching this, tell me how to pronounce your last name. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering it. But he's playing this super leady stuff, and it is treated like it's soundscape material. Now, this is not the only Soundgarden song on which that's done, but it is exactly the right choice here because Kim's playing, as cool as it is a little too weird. It's a little too weird to be the featured most dominant element in this section. And what Brendan is choosing to focus on here is what it makes sense to focus on. We've just come out of this really hypnotic section, that black hole sun that's coming in the background, this response, this left and right. We've repeated this several times. We're in like a trance-like state. And now we're moving to a new focus to the trance. It's not the call and response between center vocal and side vocals. It is the trance of this descending guitar riff. That's now the dominant section of this. Super simple descending guitar riff. And then there's all this noodly guitar solo stuff, but it's not mixed like an Yngwie Malmsteen record, right? We don't have Kim's noodly guitar stuff as the top thing, like, hey, it's a guitar solo, bring the guitar solo up. And this is something where, like, in so many other songs, it would be appropriate to bring the guitar solo up. The guitar solo, this is the focus of the song now, right? We're doing a Guns N' Roses track or something, right? Now Slash is, walking to the front of the church and plugs in, and now he's ripping on his guitar, right? That's supposed to be the hero of the song in that track, the featured element. But that is not how the lead guitar solo in this section of the song is treated at all. Check that out one more time. We're in a trance-like state. The trance focuses from vocal call and response to descending guitar riff being the A tier element. And the guitar solo, what is it? Is it high C tier? Is it low B tier? I don't know. You tell me. Have a listen.
Wash away the rain, like old sun. Won't you come? 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 Hang my head, drown my fear, till you all just disappear. Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun.
So, I mean, this section, this transition works so well too. But tell me if you hearing the same thing I am in this instrumental interlude section. Kim's guitar is panned over to the right, and our main rhythm guitar is panned over to the left a bit, but louder. These aren't super hard panned, because now we're playing slightly more intricate parts here. We're not just having like these rhythm guitars that are balancing each other where we can do super hard panning. So the panning is a little bit less, but still there. Kim a bit to the right, main descending rhythm guitar to the left. And then there's, I believe, like a third guitar in there that's panned also to the left, the same size as the main rhythm guitar, that's doing this like even more soundscapey stuff, contrapuntally to Kim's solo that's slightly more melodic, although you can barely call that solo melodic. I don't know exactly how you describe it. It's cool though. And then we have this break here. So this is really interesting. The structure of the song, we have we have intro in the beginning, right? Then we have long verse, then we have short chorus, then we have long verse, and then we have really long chorus up to instrumental section. And at the end of this instrumental section, what happens?
Hang my head, drown my fear, till you all just disappear. Black hole sun.
It's like a verse fragment, right? We have a section that I would consider this similar enough in structure to verse to call it a verse. Would you call it a bridge? But it's like the verse, but all the other instruments drop out, and then we're right back into chorus. So it's just a weird song structure, super compelling, where we have underemphasized chorus in the beginning, and we have overemphasized verses. And then like the whole back 2/3 of the song is practically like a long chorus with a snippet of verse thrown in there in the middle just to prep us for having more chorus again. Let's listen to how this continues to play out. And in this last chorus, we again have a totally different style of vocal treatment. He's yelling Black Hole Sun, and he's singing Black Hole Sun in the front, main character. And there's this second version of him, like a tiny man yelling to try to be heard over the band, slightly out of time, like set back in time from the main vocal, that's just barely poking out. So there's this one voice that is front and center, somewhat confidently but shyly serenading us, right? Like the main vocal, it's almost like a little bit of a crooner style. Like there's this serenade aspect to Chris Cornell's top line in this. But then the other part of him that is just slightly set back in time from this main person, he's screaming his guts out, barely able to be heard, and disjointed and separated from the main vocal. And this is one of these things where in rock mixing, background vocals really should be background vocals. There's a style in pop mixing where background vocals come in and they're big and they're bigger than the whole song. You'll hear that in a Bruno Mars track. You'll hear it in a Pharrell track. You'll hear that potentially in a Britney Spears track. But you're not going to hear that for prolonged periods of time in a Soundgarden track. Let's listen to this transition one more time, coming out of this interlude into this verse snippet, into this chorus, and pay attention to what the background vocal is doing in the first half of this final chorus here.
Hang my head, drown
No snare.
my fear, till you all just disappear. Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come? Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come?
Whew, so good. So that background vocal that happens in the first half of this chorus, I wonder if there's almost two choruses in the song. We call it chorus A and chorus B, right? Because the first half of the chorus and the second half of the chorus are distinct from one another. But in our first half of the chorus in this section here, the yelling in the background, Black hole sun, won't you come? He's just reinforcing that line rhythmically late, not in time with the original line. But he's not reinforcing every single thing that the main vocal does. He's not reinforcing and wash away the rain. No, we're only reinforcing Black hole sun, won't you come? And the lead itself just does some of those incidental bits like and wash away the rain. But the other thing that's important to notice about this vocal is what helps it sit back so far in the mix and sound so interesting is it sounds to me like there's very little high frequency on the background vocal. And that's one of the things that helps set it back in space. One of the other things that helps set it back in space is that it's going into a delay that's like a repeating delay, and it sounds to me like there's a ton of reverb on that repeating delay. See if you can hear that, just that we're softening a ton of top end on the vocal, and particularly on the effect, the background vocal, and particularly the effects attached to that background vocal also have a lot of top end chopped off in them. You don't need it. So much of the time when you are mixing, you do not need lots of top end on your vocal effects. And this is doubly true most of the time for background vocal effects. So listen to that, see if you can hear the same thing. It sounds like a repeating delay going into a long reverb. Rather than the background vocal itself just going into a super wet reverb, it sounds to me like it's probably going into a delay that's then going into a reverb. I could be wrong, we'll have to ask Brendan O'Brien, maybe he's talked about this at length. But honestly, this is a better exercise sometimes. This listening and trying to figure out what they're doing can be a better exercise than having a mixer tell you a trick that they did. Sometimes when you're reading an interview with somebody, you're like, oh, I use this trick on this song. You're like, that's a cool trick. I'll file that in the Rolodex of mental Rolodex. This is a trick I can use. And then you're doing your mix and you're like, I don't know what to do in this mix. Let me pull out from the mental Rolodex. What's a trick you can use? Putting background vocal into a delay, and then the delay goes into a reverb. And you arbitrarily pull that out. That's so much less important than developing a sense memory for what was going on with that background vocal in Black Hole Sun. I can still hear it. Right now, I can call up in my mind how it made me feel. Why did it do that? What were some of the textures I was noticing around it? Can I put a spot for that in my brain? And then when you're mixing, instead of thinking about a technique, you're chasing a destination. Oh, how do I make this vocal sound like it's a little bit more in the background? How do I get it a little bit softer? How do I get it to sound distant without it sounding totally reverbed out and washed out? You don't necessarily need a ton of long reverbs to make things sound spacious and big. Because this mix has just a brilliant use of super dry elements. Lead vocal is pretty dry. Drums on this track are pretty dry. Some guitars are pretty damn dry, and some are swirly. Sometimes our background vocals are dry, matching the lead, and sometimes they're way off in the distance, and they're the one thing that's really reverby in the mix, sitting behind everything else. So listen to how that background vocal is treated one more time in the section, and then you'll notice when we get into the second half of this chorus that a different game is being played, and that's the game of slowly bringing up all of the weird soundscapey guitar stuff that Kim and maybe another guitarist in the band are doing. And just allowing that stuff to blossom more and more slowly, subtly, but never overtaking the guitar riff and the vocal. And the guitar riff and the vocal in this chorus are way more important than all the noodling that's happening on the guitars. And the guitar players, to a degree, are respecting that. But even more importantly, the mixer is also respecting that and not trying to bring these guitar solos up. Because right now, often a guitar solo, when there's a guitar solo, should be the most important thing. But in this song, it's not. And he recognized that and respected it. And that is one of the biggest things in mixing, is understanding what's important in the song in any given time and helping the listener focus on those things rather than other things. All right, let's hear that background vocal one more time. Then we'll take a quick listen to just the beginning of Fell on Black Days, because just the beginning of it, the transition into where everything drops in is gorgeous. Here we go.
Black hole sun, won't you come? Wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come? Won't you come?
And to be honest, now that I'm listening to it again, I'm not sure that maybe the background vocal is singing at the same time as the vocal, but you can't hear it doing that. And what you hear is just the delayed version of it, because now it's not being masked by the lead vocal. So I'm not sure if the background vocal sounds delayed in time because it's being performed that way, or if it's because it's actually a delay and we can just barely hear it while the main vocal is there. But really well done. Great texture. And you can hear in each section, one of the things that makes this compelling is there's different things being done with the background vocal treatment in each section of this song. And that's one of the more produced aspects of this song. But it didn't take a ton of effort to do that. It's just a few simple things. You don't need necessarily all the time crazy 4-part harmony and every single line in the song having different background vocals. just a few things that work can do a ton. Let's check out the same kind of stuff real quick on Fell on Black Days. This is probably Soundgarden's second biggest song, and beautiful sounding rock production. I mean, this is kind of what rock records should sound like, especially on a good system. Let's hear a little bit of Fell on Black Days. Notice panning first and foremost in this opening section, and then how it changes when the rest of the instrumentation drops in. Now, what's happening there in the intro? First of all, one of the reasons it works for these first 15 seconds is that it's so rhythmically compelling. Like how that hi-hat is hitting and how those guitars are hitting, you can get away with this minimalism for the first 14, 15 seconds. It's just building tension. I sometimes hear artists, newer artists I'm coaching, where they'll have a 14 or 15 second intro, and honestly, their intros sometimes aren't 14 and 15 seconds. They're 30 and 40 seconds of nothing happening. These guys only do 15 seconds of nothing happening, so let that be a lesson to you. But they're so rhythmically tight, the interplay between that hi-hat and the guitars, that we can get away with it being this sparse because of how tight it is rhythmically. But notice the panning. We have guitars basically, practically, I think I would call it hard pan to the right. And then the hi-hat, I don't know if it's 100% hard pan to the left. Maybe there's a little bit of it sneaking into the right, whether that's through a reverb or from it not being 100% pan. I'm not sure. But the spirit of it is a left, center, right approach to mixing, where it's like things are going to be hard left or hard right or in the center. And even if that's not 100% accurate with what Brendan's actually doing, he might be tucking things back a little bit from hard left and hard right. That's the spirit of what he's doing. I almost could guarantee you he's starting with the idea of, I want to pan everything hard left and hard right. And if I can't get away with it and I have to tuck something back a little bit from hard left or hard right, I will. But that's a great way to go about panning, is to try to make things left, center, right. And if it just turns out to be too much, things are a little too disjointed, then tuck it back in. But have left, center, right be your first stop. And I think that's definitely it's almost certainly the approach Brendan takes to get mixes that sound like this. Here we go.
Whatsoever I feel has come to light, and whatsoever I thought of became my life.
Cool. Now, one of the things that's happening here on Fell on Black Days, and we'll wrap this up in just a second, I just want to drive this point home around guitar relationships and panning. So important here. There's a hole in the left side because this hi-hat doesn't have nearly as much level or weight behind it as the guitar. And there's this hole that's just waiting to be filled in. One of the things you can always look for in mixes, especially in intros to mixes, if you want things to drop hard, is to create holes in your mix that get filled in. We heard that with Britney Spears' Toxic last week, where it's like the hole that was created is the hole was on top and bottom. We had this band-limited, mid-rangey, radio-y intro, and then there was a hole of missing top and bottom, and then track drops after about 15, 20 seconds, that hole gets filled with the top and bottom. All of a sudden, the low-frequency extension is there that we didn't have before. The hole that's getting filled this time is the left side. So we have right side guitar and just enough going on in the left to make it so that it doesn't feel totally disjointed and lopsided. But there's a little bit of emptiness in the left relative to the right. Then we have this additional guitar come in, this kind of atmospheric-y / leady guitar that's kind of feels like it's to the left because there's a loud guitar on the right, but is kind of centered, and it's kind of swirling further back in the center. It's a much more distant guitar. And then when things drop, this is where we get such a satisfying new guitar part come in hard left, filling the hole and restoring the sense of balance. Like something has been off kilter. There's been this slight sense of edge. And then we're satisfied when we get to this chorus by having that left hole get filled in. Let's hear that transition. See if you can hear what I'm talking about there. I wouldn't be surprised if Brendan is riding the faders on this in real time, like organically, and changing the relationship between vocal and snare and guitar subtly over time. I don't know, because at different points, I want to say different things are kind of A tier. There's definitely like movement in this mix. I don't feel like we have one static mix relationship. But I would say, what are the main characters in this verse section? For me, he's got it right. For rock records in general, it is guitars, vocal, and snare. And there's many moments when I'm listening to this section where I feel like the guitars are allowed to win. And that's awesome. And they should be allowed to win. And the vocal kind of feels like it takes a slight back seat to the guitars. But then as we get further on, like all of a sudden his vocal performance is spicing up and the vocal seems to step in front of the guitars for me. Like, I don't have a fixed perspective on this mix. My perspective on this mix is changing a little bit over time. And some of the older school mixers from this time, if you've ever listened to Michael Brower talk about his approach to mixing, he's always looking for that kind of things in his mix. He's looking for movement. He's looking for the perspective on the mix to change a little bit over time. Hey, I'm tired of the vocalist being the main character here. This isn't where the vocal should be the main character. The guitar should be the main character here. Oh, but what's going on in the vocal here is so important. I want them to win that battle ever so slightly. And I feel like this shifting is happening there. I'd love to talk to Brendan and ask him if that's an approach that he's taking, because that's absolutely something that Michael Brower and so many other great mixers who I've talked to do in their mixes. That they're riding these levels. And this is a cool thing. You don't necessarily have to, when you're talking about tier A, tier B, tier C, they don't have to be fixed. I think it's super important at all times to say, what's the primary character in this song? But that can vary from section to section, right? We don't need the same primary character in our verse as in our chorus. Maybe, like we discovered in the song Happy, the background vocals became practically the primary character. The background vocals and the claps were practically the primary character in the chorus, but they weren't the primary character in the verse. But here we discover that even within one section, even within a verse, the focus of the verse can change ever so slightly over time. Let me know, can you point your finger at what's the primary character between vocal, guitar, and snare? I feel like it shifts over the course of the verse. Let me know what you think.
Whatsoever I feel has come to light, and whatsoever I thought of became my life. Just when every day seemed to greet me with a smile, sun's about to fade it. Now I'm doing time. Now I'm doing time.
It's just so well mixed. It's like you can focus on anything that you want. And some of what I'm talking about there might be my own focus being allowed to shift. It's mixed so brilliantly that you can focus on anything that you want to in the mix. However, I'm going to stand by it saying that my tier A elements here are guitar and vocal. Tell the main story of the song and are the main characters for this section. Guitar and vocal, listening to it again, that's tier A in this section, with a very high B tier being the snare. And can you hear the kick clearly if you want to? Yes. Can you hear the bass clearly if you want to? Yes. Can you hear the hi-hat clearly if you want to? Yes. Are they A tier though? Are they distracting from the main story being told by the vocal and the guitar in this section, with the snare being the most important supporting element in B tier in this section? Let's hear what happens from verse to chorus, and then we'll call it a day for today.
Cause I fell on black days. I fell on black days. Whomsoever.
It's the same song structure again. There are other big song here where we're hinting at a difference that we're going to have in the chorus, but we don't have this fully fleshed out chorus yet. It's almost like all verse in the first half of the song with an interruption to hint at what a chorus might be like, and then we're back into the verse. So to really get to a chorus, we'll have to go further on, but you find the same trick again done here with the background vocals. It's really separated from the main vocal. It's supporting the main vocal. It's below it. And there's a lot less top end on the background vocal than there is on the lead. And there's a repeating delay probably into a reverb. So getting rid of top end on these effects, getting rid of top end on the background vocal, while making sure it's not super boomy, totally works. Let's hear if we can find transition to the real chorus. Can you even really call that a chorus? It's so related to the verse that's almost just a pre-chorus. And now we get into the real chorus. Black days. How would I know that this could be my fate? How would I know that this could be my fate? Now, I don't want to get into analyzing this song because this song has, again, an unusual song structure. There's such this droning thing going on in this song where so many of the different sections are related to one another with riffs that stay. Like, we moved into a new section, or is it the same section as before with different frills, or just a new section? What would you call it? So, man, we could do a whole hour just on Fell on Black Days, but I hope some of this stuff was useful. I'm going to check out, first of all, how long I've been ranting now. 56 minutes I've been talking about Black Hole Sun. A lot of stuff to learn in there. Hope that some of this has been useful for you. These are the kinds of things I hear and listen for. Looking at the stats on the stream, most of you, for some reason, have stuck with me for like an hour talking about 2 minutes of music. So I really appreciate that you guys are willing to go this deep and nerdy with me. Really forcing yourself to listen analytically on occasion is so useful. It's like there's this Charlie Parker quote where he says, you got to learn a whole bunch of shit so you can just forget it all and just play. I think the same thing is true for mixing, producing. You've got to sit down and think super analytically so you have done that work. And now when you're actually doing your real productions yourself, you can turn off a lot of that stuff and work more instinctively because you've already done the hard work and the repeated exposure of really listening and doing this like guided listening. And I really think me explaining this to you helps me hear it better. So sometimes when you are analyzing mixes, you should be doing the same thing. Explain it to yourself what's going on. Explain it to someone else, or write down on paper what you're hearing in each section about the mix. And I have exercises like this in the Mixing Breakthroughs course that may make you be able to hear this level of detail just by doing these exercises. And you will come away changed for life in the way that you hear things, but you'll also be able to turn it off and just enjoy music. I don't always listen to music with this lens on, but when I do, it can help me discover what are problems, how we can fix them, and what are some ideas that we haven't tried that could totally change what's going on in this song. It's a form of listening I want you to be able to tap into. Great way to be able to tap into it is check out one of our full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs, Compression Breakthroughs, Mastering Demystified, EQ Breakthroughs. They will change the way you work forever for the better, or your money back. Also, you can consider becoming a member of this YouTube channel. We do regular mix feedback sessions where I give this kind of treatment to your mixes. But instead of spending an hour, we can often in 5 or 10 minutes for each of the members who join our mix feedback sessions, in 5 or 10 minutes of this kind of listening to one of your tracks, we can go over all of your lowest hanging fruit. What are the things that separate the sound of your tracks from your favorite releases? And that's something that we can do super cheaply to become a member of this. Look at the join button down there. It can't stay as cheap as it is now forever. So definitely check that out. Big thanks and shout out to Soundtoys for sponsoring this podcast, as always, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. I feel like I could talk about these tracks for another hour or two, so let me stop here. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time.